What's going on, Fit Fam? Today I have something special for you. So I want to welcome you guys to Wellness Wednesday to talk a little bit about something that I feel is near and dear and true to all of us. Like there's something about this topic that I'm sure has hit home with everybody who's ever watched this or who's going to be watching this. So if you're a human, you've probably felt this way and you probably weren't sure how to deal with it. So today is Wellness Wednesday. We're going to talk about how to handle not feeling good enough. So I think that's something that we all struggle with, the feeling of not being good enough in any kind of situation, whether it's not good enough as a parent, as an employee, as a spouse, just as a person in general, as a woman. I feel like this is a topic that we all struggle with. It's something that really is hard to deal with. And we've all felt that way. We've all been there where we feel like we're just, whatever it is that we're doing, we're just not good enough. And it causes some serious pain, and it stems from self-doubt, and it stems from wanting love. So I think that a big thing that we struggle with is knowing that no matter what it is, wherever it's coming from, that pain point of not feeling good enough, it's because we want this love and acceptance, and we're afraid to do something and feel that rejection that comes along with the action that we're supposed to take. So the feeling of not good enough usually comes from our comparison to others. We're so good at that, right? We're scrolling Instagram, we're scrolling Facebook, we're walking in the mall, wherever we are. That's what we do. We compare ourselves. We want to gauge where we are. We want to be able to fit into some kind of category. That's just the way our brain works. And sometimes, most times, when we compare ourselves, it actually makes us feel inadequate. It makes us feel like we're not good enough. We may not know that person, but we're walking down the mall, walking past somebody, and women, I feel we do this a lot more. You're comparing yourself to the girl walking down. Oh man, I wish I had legs like hers. I wish my hair looked like hers. Man, I just don't feel pretty enough. I don't feel skinny enough. I don't feel voluptuous enough. And social media in general, marketing targets us quite a bit as women, and I feel like that's so much harder, especially in this day and age, to deal with something like that, where we're specifically targeted to make us not feel good enough so that we can make a purchase that'll give us this release of pain that we're feeling because we don't feel good enough. Another place that this feeling of not good enough comes from is previous failures. If you're human, you have failed. And failure, it does bring about pain. It fucking hurts. And it sucks to fail. But every failure has a lesson. And when we learn that lesson, we grow. And sometimes growth can be painful too, but it's necessary. So previous failures can cause you to feel not good enough. How we were treated when we were successful. So maybe when you were younger, growing up, or whenever you did this amazing job at doing something. For example, you brought home this cool painting when you're in like first grade. It's the coolest work you've ever done, and you gave it to your mom and said, "Here you go." And your mom's like, "What is this?" Overwhelmed moms do this. I still catch myself that I do this, and I just kind of push it to the side, and their little kids are great at being creative and feeling good and wanting to show off what they're doing, because it's like, oh yeah, great, and they want a little bit of praise and acknowledgement. And what happens is that success, or that feeling of what we were doing was awesome, was either brushed aside as like irrelevant, insignificant, or didn't get much credit. Parents do this a lot. As a teacher, when I had this experience, you would have kids who were outstanding students, great, they would do things that were awesome, and parents still wanted more. Instead of saying, "Wow, you've been doing great," they'll say, "That's still not good enough." Your kid could be bringing home A's and B's, and you set that standard of that's not good enough, and you don't give them credit for what's going good. So that's another place where feeling of not being good enough can stem from. So when you're doing something and you should feel some kind of success and you're not given that due, you're not given that credit, it kind of chips away at, well, maybe I didn't do that well. Maybe when I do well, it's still not enough. And this is a tragedy because some people take this feeling of not good enough and they'll never be good enough and they end their lives. Tragic. Young people especially, it's such a hard thing to deal with. So this is definitely an issue that should be addressed and should be talked about a lot more, because it can lead to people feeling so terrible that they'll never be good enough. What's the point? So that's definitely one of the reasons that I'm talking about this today. At the end of the day, we just want acceptance, and we just never seem to get it. We're wanting external acceptance. We want that love. Feeling not good enough is a very strong desire to be accepted, to feel significant, to feel like you matter. And when you don't, it hurts and you fall into this stupor, and it just feels like no matter what we do, it's just not good enough. Sometimes it motivates you. Okay, well, that wasn't good enough, then I'll just work harder. Kids, I see it all the time when I'm teaching, kids, I'll just work harder. I'll take on extracurricular activities. I'll be the best person in UIL. I'll be the best person at this. And they become these overachievers, and they just fill their plate with all this stuff. But for some reason, they just still don't feel good enough. Another thing that we do when we feel not good enough is we beat ourselves up. We engage in negative self-talk. We start talking to ourselves. So we start saying things like, I'll never be good enough. What's the point in trying? I keep doing this and I just can't ever do it. And we start to engage in negative self-talk, and we become abusers to ourselves and start treating ourselves so poorly that we actually don't even feel like we're worthy of that love and acceptance that we so want. And that becomes just as dangerous as before, that you want this acceptance and you still don't know how to get it. So what I want to prepare you guys with today are some tools, some things, some practices that you can engage in, because this is something that we all go through. No one is an exception, even me. It becomes less and less of an issue when you know that, okay, I have control of it. When you remove that victim mindset and you're like, okay, I'm going to take control and I'm going to stop feeling this pain. At some point, you have to find that threshold of pain that you're like, I don't want to feel this anymore. So this is what I'm going to do about it. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that I do to eliminate the feeling of not good enough at that spot, in that moment, so that I can not feel that anymore. Because it's natural. Our comparison, our mind is set to categorize us into something, and not good enough is a category. That's all it is. It's a category, and we have to define what enough is. So, step one, you need to get real with yourself. You need to find the source of what's making you feel like you're not good enough. Is it work? Is it your spouse? Is it your parenting? Is it your kids? Is it your parents telling you you're not good enough? What is the source, and how can we remove that feeling of not good enough? What can you do? Is it a person or a place or something that is making you feel not good enough? Can we eliminate this thing in our life? And you're probably like, well, I can't eliminate my kids. I can't eliminate my parents. I'm going to tell you that yes, you can actually eliminate that feeling of not good enough in your life. No, you can't go and get rid of your kids, but you can either improve upon a place in your work where you're not feeling good enough. You can address what enough means and have that discussion with that person that isn't making you feel good enough. If it's a spouse, a mate, and you have that discussion and they don't want to cooperate in engaging in positive activities to help you feel loved and feel like you're good enough, then leave them. If your job's not valuing the work that you provide, and you're showing up, you did that self-check, okay, I show up on time, I do what I'm supposed to do, I go above and beyond, and they're not valuing your work, then fucking get a new job. If it's a spouse that's doing the same thing, that you do a self-check and you're like, and it takes some serious cojones to go in there and do that self-check, because we don't want to look in the mirror. We don't want to look in the mirror and see if we're enough. And I'm going to go through what enough means in just a minute. But you can totally take yourself out of that situation if it's with a spouse, your parents. If your mom constantly berates you and tells you you're not a good parent, don't call her. I know that sounds harsh, but don't continue to be in that circle of people who make you feel like you're not enough. Just remove yourself from them. There's plenty of jobs out there. Be your own boss if that's what needs to be happening. All right. So if it's your parenting style, if you're feeling like you're not good enough as a parent, then my suggestion is big self-check. Big self-check. Why am I feeling this way? Where is it coming from? Is it something that's real? So now let's talk about what enough is. You're doing all this reflecting on your behaviors, on what you're doing, and you have to give it a parameter. You have to stop and think, okay, what is enough? If you notice when I told you about your job, you're trying to figure out, okay, am I doing good enough in my work, and seeing if those checkpoints were a yes. You set parameters. What does good enough mean for work? What does good enough mean for a spouse? What does good enough mean for a parent? Give yourself parameters. Turn that word enough, which is subjective, which could be anything, and it's so broad and vague. Turn it into this objective, clearly defined parameter of what enough is. What does it mean to be good enough as a parent? What characteristics does a good parent have? And you set those. You, through your moral integrity, whatever you feel a good parent should have, those characteristics, those traits, you set those, you define those. And then if you're falling short in those, okay, what do I need to do to become that? So now you've gone from this vague picture of what enough is to this clearly defined picture of who a good parent is. What does a good spouse look like to me? How do I want to feel by being a good spouse? How would I want to be a good spouse to somebody else? How would I want to be a good parent? What kind of parent did I have? And what traits did I like? What traits did I not like? Which ones do I still now use in my parenting style, and which ones should I abandon? Know this, that if you want to feel enough, you have to set those clearly defined parameters, and you have to be willing to let go of behaviors that aren't letting you feel enough. Because at the end of the day, the only person who is in control of you feeling enough or not is you. That's a hard pill to swallow. We want to deflect that responsibility to somebody else. We really do. And if you were a child from 0 to 10, I'd say, you know what? It's not you. But after 10, 11, you have a little bit more cognitive abilities to change your mindset, to change how you want to feel. Heck, and I want to say that even smaller, you may not understand what's going on, but I know that as a child, when I was growing up, I knew what kind of person I didn't want to be. I didn't understand, that it was the enough parameter that I was setting for myself, but I knew that the feeling that I was feeling at that point in time, I knew growing up, I didn't want to be a mom like my mom. I didn't want to be a parent like my parents. And I set those parameters for myself, and I started going in the direction completely opposite of the example that I had growing up. It was completely different. And those parameters were set by me, and I can tell you that my earliest memory of feeling that way at such an early age, I was 5. I was 5 writing a letter to my mom, "You don't love me," and thinking to myself, I am going to be, when I grow up, such a good mom. I'm going to love my kids like nobody's business. I know that growing up, in an abusive home, I knew that I was not going to be an abusive parent. I developed this feeling of hatred towards abuse, and I knew, without understanding, that this is something that I could change as soon as I grew up. So even at an early age, we can accept responsibility for where our future is going. But we have to set that parameter of what enough means. So remember that when we want to feel enough, it is us seeking love. We want love. We want acceptance. We want to feel some kind of pleasure and joy, because who wouldn't, right? So if you can turn this feeling of subjective, super vague concept of enough into objective, clearly defined parameters, you can set it up so that you know exactly what you need to do to receive that love, to start feeling significant and acceptance and like you matter. But here's another question I have for you. Who are you looking to have acceptance from? This is such an important thing too. Knowing who you want love and acceptance from is very, very important, and could definitely be a reason why you're still not feeling enough. You may be wanting love and acceptance from the wrong people. Some people you just have to let go of, and that is a gut check. When you define what enough means, you'll start to realize that those people who make you feel like you're not enough don't matter, because those people will never allow you to feel enough no matter what you do. So you have to learn to let go of things, characteristics that are holding you back from being your enough, clearly set, defined parameters. And you're also going to have to learn to let go of people who do not fit in to help you continue to becoming that person that is enough in your own eyes. So it's so important that you do that. Are the people that I'm wanting to associate with people who I should actually want approval from? If it's an abusive spouse, if it's an abusive parent, then the answer, the solution is let them go. If they want to grow with you, they will follow suit and change their actions. If they don't, you're better off anyway. So, like I mentioned before, the bottom line is we want to feel love. That's why we follow a pattern. A lot of what we do is something that we learned growing up. We grew up in an environment that molded our minds. Like I mentioned before, I grew up in an abusive environment with parents who were not the best parents. And I set up parameters in my mind saying, one day when I grow up, I'm going to be loved, and I'm going to not follow these patterns that they left for me. Some patterns were harder to break than others because it's a cycle, right? But that doesn't mean that you're confined to following those patterns. Identify them. Find out, okay, this is what I grew up with. Oh my gosh, I'm doing the exact same thing. How can I change it? Believe it or not, there is a resource out there anywhere to do whatever it is that you're trying to do, to reset a pattern. You grew up in an environment where your dad drank all the time and was an alcoholic. You do the exact opposite. That's how you change the pattern. You grew up in an environment where your parents were super nitpicky about every little thing and nothing was good enough. Give your child praise. Show them that what they do does matter and that they are important, and that they do feel that same source of love that you wanted. But know that when we follow a pattern that we grew up with that was leading us to those same negative feelings and pain, we're only going to continue to get pain. You're going to continue those negative feelings, and you're also going to perpetuate those same feelings in your family, in your life. So if you want something to change, you have to be that change. You have to be willing to look in the mirror and accept responsibility for everything. You may not have been in control when you were 5 or 6 or 10, but you're in control now. And anything and everything that you have is now up to you. So what do we know? We know that the feeling of not good enough is so vague. It's such a broad term. And that we know that we have to give it some clarity. We have to set specific parameters. What does good enough mean? List those characteristics. Write them down. What does a good enough woman look like? What would that mean to me if I were a good enough woman? What characteristics would I need to feel like I was good enough? Usually those have to do with like integrity. I would have to be moral. I would be honest. I'm a hardworking woman. What does it look like? So you list those out, define them. What does it feel like? What actions do I need to take? When you have those written down on paper, then you're like, okay, you can check them off. Now it's not a feeling anymore, not this feeling that you just can't tame. Now you're like, okay, you know what? I am good enough. Look at, I've got morality here, check. I'm loyal, check. And start checking those off. All right, I've got these things. Which ones am I missing? All right, so maybe I'm not as hardworking as I thought. I sleep in too much, so I'm gonna work on that. Now you've given yourself things to work on. Now you've given yourself an idea of how you can be good enough in your own eyes. And set these up to where they're your own eyes, where it's your ideas and characteristics that would make you feel proud to wake up in the morning and introduce yourself to somebody. What's going on? So, make sure you list them. Which ones do you have? Which ones are a priority? So you're not going to start working on things. You're not going to start working on things that aren't a priority. For example, if you want to be somebody who's a leader and you're working on, let me come up with a good example. If you're wanting to be a leader and you're working on tidiness, that's not conducive to helping you out. Learning how to be a leader is way more important than, being OCD and cleaning your house. OCD is actually a coping mechanism of not feeling good enough, by the way. So, Edison, come here. A lot of these things that we do to procrastinate or, distract ourselves are ways that we cope for not feeling good enough and deal with the pain that we are trying not to feel so much. So, when you start to write them down and check them off, you can actually start to feel like, okay, you know what? I am enough. So, start with reflecting and looking at where you are today. Examine, why do you want to have this approval from somebody else? Is it something that is absolutely necessary? Usually when we're saying that we're not good enough, it's because we're looking for love and acceptance of others. I've already said this, but a big question that you need to ask yourself is, will becoming this person who is good enough bring about that love? A lot of times it's not. A lot of times that feeling of acceptance from somebody else will go away when you start realizing that you are enough. And people will follow suit. If you start treating yourself, talking to yourself in a manner that you start to say, okay, I am enough, those people around you will follow suit. They'll start treating you like you are enough, like you matter. So, the only acceptance you need, you guys, is your own. The only acceptance that you need is your own. And when you start to define those parameters of what enough is, you're going to start to accept you for you and stop using everyone else's idea of society's idea, your parents' idea, your grandparents' standard of what enough is when you set your own. When you set your own. And you start to realize, okay, you know what? For me, myself, I am good enough. You get to set your own standards. And that feeling will start to go away. Only at the end of the day, you guys, only you will answer for your own actions. No one else is going to pay for the mistakes you made. No one else is going to be held responsible or accountable for the behaviors you make. Those are yours. So why shouldn't that feeling of enough be yours too? Take control of what enough is. Let it be something that you own and not something that someone else uses to define you. Stop letting that victim mindset run your life. That is one that is a huge, huge thing that we all deal with. We all would love to sit back and let someone else take the blame for whether or not we are enough. And it is blame. You have to start accepting responsibility for everything that is you, even your feelings, especially your feelings, because when you stop, I have love, When you stop letting others dictate who you are, how you feel, Grace, then you start to leave the being a victim. You stop being a victim and you start taking charge of your own life. And that is the way that you start feeling like you're enough. So, Grace, can you go?
No.
She doesn't want to go. All right, so you've defined your parameters. Remember that your feeling of good enough is just like a bank account. You have to set up an amount. For example, if you're looking at your finances and you're like, oh, do I have enough money to pay for my bills? You're gonna check your bank account. You're like, well, first you need to tally up your bills. How much is it for this month? All right, rent is $700. Groceries are $200 a week. And you start setting it up. Once you have that total, then you're like, all right, I have enough. Your feeling of good enough is the same thing. You have to tally it up with those character traits and then define, all right, do I have enough? Am I enough? That is totally up to you. Be raw, be real, and be true with yourself. Don't wait to let somebody else define whether you're enough or not, because most times, more often than not, you won't measure up. Enough is such a subjective term that it can be vague. It's so broad. And I keep saying this to you because until you define what enough is, it will define who you are. So take control of your life. No longer be willing to live in that victim mindset. You take responsibility of your life. You take control of it. You set up who you want to be enough for. And that should be you, not anybody else. If you've made mistakes in your life, you're like, oh, I've made so many mistakes. How can I ever be enough if I've made mistakes? And here's what I have to say to you. If you've made mistakes in the past, you learn from them. You have to learn from them. And I want to congratulate you. You're fucking human. You're welcome. Congratulations. You're human. Everybody makes mistakes. Your mistakes don't have to define the rest of your life. Your mistakes are just that, a lesson that you need to learn. And sometimes it takes you a little bit longer to learn that lesson. Sometimes it takes you making that same mistake or living that same consequence over and over and over until you learn that lesson. But realize you're human. Humans make mistakes. Forgive yourself. Forgive yourself is such a hard thing for us to do. It's so hard because we feel like if we forgive ourselves, then we're giving ourselves permission to make that mistake again. Or that we're freeing ourselves from the fact that we made a mistake and treating it like it just didn't happen. Or like it's accepting the fact that it happened. Forgiveness means none of those. Forgiveness means that you understand that you're human and that you're doing the best you can and that you will not make that mistake anymore. That you feel bad for what you did. Yes, but you don't have to live in that guilt. You learn from the mistake and you move on. Like I mentioned before, enough is only what you say it is. So if you don't give it a definition, it will define you. I hope this was helpful, you guys. I trust that you guys might be able to share this. If you found it helpful, please share this. I am going to be uploading this to my YouTube link, and that link is in my bio for those of you who want to go in there and subscribe. I will be sharing that as well. So you guys have an amazing day. Wellness Wednesday is definitely a love of mine because self-care is so important, you guys. So you have an amazing rest of your day. I challenge you to go out there and set parameters of what your enough is, even if you feel like I don't struggle with feeling good enough. Because maybe it's not an everyday thing that you feel like you're not good enough, but it comes up. And when you start defining what enough is, maybe you're going to realize that, hey, I might have been undershooting myself. Maybe I could have been doing a little bit more. So have an amazing rest of your day, and I will talk to you guys later.